Hello, everybody. I'm Colehour Bondera. I'm on the Beyond Pesticides Board of Directors, and I'm going to moderate this session. And I anticipate that some of you were in the last session, but this time you're going to have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we have several additional presenters as well. So the way logistically we're going to handle it is that each of the speakers will come up here and have about 10 minutes to do their presentations, and then once the last one is, there's 5 of them, and once the last one's done, they'll all be sitting up here, and I'll walk around with the microphone and do questions and answers. So that is the plan, and I'll briefly come up here and introduce them as they come up, and then are waiting for the other one. So this is Dr. Mark Davis, who is a professor of biology, and he's going to share with us some of his experience on the subject of, I want to say invasive, but it says invasion biology, which both are true. And welcome, Mark.
I think this is my first talk here.
Okay, maybe there's a problem. We'll see here. Hold on. Well, she did put it in. Hold on.
Yeah, we could close that out.
Yeah, she said it was
And then you gotta
in
go
this
down
folder,
to-
she said.
Okay.
That's what she told me.
All right, so now go to,
She told me it was that one.
that is the.
That's the one I clicked on. She said everybody's would be on here, and Greg's wasn't on the other
So
one.
why don't, so they.
Oh, wait, no, this is okay. This is the one, yeah.
That is the one?
I didn't realize I used the same
Well, I don't
first
know.
slide. Yeah, this is the
Oh,
one.
I see. Okay, so you, okay.
Yeah, we're fine.
Now,
Sorry
if
for
I
the-
can figure it out.
Sorry for the confusion.
One more? Yeah, one more?
You
Yeah,
can
got
also- You
it.
can just hit that.
Yeah,
That'll
that's
work.
what I was going to do. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I don't know if I'll take the full 10 minutes here. I really just want to raise a topic and raise some questions. And that is the process of assessing harm. We intervene, particularly in the wildlands, but also in agricultural systems, because something's happening that we don't like, and we often call what's happening as harmful. People often don't really question the process of that has taken place to declare something as harmful. Officially, and I do mean officially, legally, there are, with respect to introduced species, there are 3 types of harm that they can produce. They can negatively affect human health, negatively affect the economy, and then they can affect the ecological systems in a way that might be declared harmful. There's usually not a lot of disagreement on the first 2. You know, there's something that's a pathogen, that the flu pathogen, there's not much disagreement that, yeah, that's harmful. We really need to try to control it, try to even eradicate it. Significant economic harm, also usually not a lot of controversy about. So when it comes to ecological harm, that I don't think there is as much questioning and discussion as I think there probably should be. First of all, harm is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, there aren't signs that emerge from the land out there that say something harmful is going on here. I mean, stuff just goes on, and it's humans that end up declaring that there's a harmful system taking place here. Of particular importance, because I see it a lot with respect to ecological systems, for some people it appears that change by itself is harmful. I mean, this is certainly true within people who are embracing the nativism paradigm, that just mere simple change in relative abundances of species, some species, maybe species that have been here for thousands of years, might be becoming less abundant, and some new species are entering and becoming more abundant. That's change. Again, there's no sign out there. There's no ecological imperative that says that this need be considered harmful. But in many cases, change by itself is considered harm, and that's something I think needs to be challenged when it comes to ecological systems. What's also true is what's viewed as harmful or beneficial or just change, it varies among stakeholders. One of the best examples that I've come across is that I have been told that in cases where the Minnesota DNR has been out trying to eradicate garlic mustard, a supposed highly terrible species. Actually, at McAllister, we've been studying garlic mustard at the McAllister Field Station site for over 6 years now. We have yet to find negative effects on any native species, despite what you hear. The main finding so far is that the best predictor of garlic mustard is a high diversity of native plants. Or another way of looking at it, where garlic mustard is, there's a higher diversity of native plants than where garlic mustard isn't. But back to my example, so the DNR is out, pulling, spraying to get rid of garlic mustard, and they have sometimes run into Hmong women who are out collecting it for food. And of course, that's why garlic mustard was introduced in the first place, was for food. So again, what's harmful, what's beneficial, oftentimes the people who have the power to make that declaration are working from a very different cultural, social system than many other of the citizens. And so that gets to the question of who gets to declare harm. And well, frankly, it's the people in power that get to declare harm. And so generally it's the people in the DNR. There are also, in case you haven't noticed, introduced species don't have a sign on their back that says, "Hi, I'm an invasive species." We have just brought them here and they're just trying to live their lives as they can. And it's humans that have assigned the term invasive and harmful to them. And declaring harm has really big implications. I mean, once something is declared harmful, society basically has an obligation then to try to ameliorate this harm. And if, stories are passed on about the horrible things that these species do, then that justifies the use of almost anything to get rid of these horrible species, including heavy use of pesticides or heavy equipment or whatever. Yeah, so who gets to declare a species as invasive is not something that I've really ever heard people talk about. But there are people who get to declare that. And in most cases, the general public is not consulted. Do we think this is harmful or not? It's a small group of people coming from a certain educational background, usually at least in Minnesota, a particularly cultural background. They're usually white. And that has an effect on what's viewed as beneficial, what's viewed as harmful, or what's viewed as just neutral. Yeah, and basically, as I have said, and it's one of my favorite lines, yeah, you can garden in your garden because it's small enough and it's in your yard and you can do whatever you want in your yard. But so much of what's taking place in the wildlands and with the use of pesticides is really an effort to try to garden nature itself. That is virtually impossible to have nature look the way and to be represented the way that we want it to. It's very easy when we intervene to make things worse. And in particular, having what I call a linear approach, which is that you view something as a problem, and if we just get rid of it, then all the problems will be solved. That often turns out to create other problems because the people didn't take a systems approach. You can never, as I tell my students, you can never just do one thing when you intervene in nature. There are always going to be other consequences which usually aren't thought of very much. And I think this is my last slide. Yeah, the fact is, and this is just true in life in general, there are certain things we can change. But then there are things that we really can't change, and we sort of have a choice. We can change our attitude and learn to live with them, with this change that has occurred. Or we can be miserable, frankly, for the rest of our life. I feel kind of bad for the people that just can't stand to see a non-native plant species out there. A lot of them are beautiful. And they're here for good. They're not going back. They're part of the Minnesota flora or the North American flora. They're here. And in many cases, I think the only really reasonable approach that we have in some cases is to change our attitude, because we really don't have the ability to garden nature. I think that's it. Thank you.
Escape from here. Come on. Hello. There we go. Where's the button? Okay. So our next speaker is Chip Osborne, again, nationally renowned organic turfgrass expert. And when he was up here last time, he corrected what's in the type here from 35 years to 40 years of experience. So well experienced, and so welcome, Chip.
Hey. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly show you pictures. You've heard me, before. Just some case studies to show that it works, so I can leave a little bit more time for others. The American lawn, a little bit of grass, 100% organic. There's no weeds in it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. We've heard about the science, heard about the newest research, risk assessment, the pesticide applicator sign. And then that happens. It's kind of counterintuitive. And then they'll tell you that after that sign, as soon as it's dry to the touch, it's perfectly safe. That compound that was put on that lawn has a half-life of 100 days. It's not, dryness has nothing to do with it. So the natural management, lawn and turf, or landscape, homeowners, lawn care professionals, municipalities, federal government, all based on a systems approach. This is a Beyond Pesticide slide. Going green in your backyard means eliminating synthetics. Two ways to manage. We can manage using allowed pesticides, those 25Bs or those Armory approved, or we can manage without any pesticides and just use those 25Bs or Armory as needed, and that's what we should do. There should never be even an allowed pesticide incorporated into a program. We manage to communicate expectations. Low expectations, low quality, high expectations, high quality, but low's not bad, and high's not necessarily good. It's the right quality and the right expectation for an individual site. High expectation turfgrass means managing to less than 5% weed pressures per acre. And believe me, in 43,560 square feet, 5% weeds is negligible. We don't sacrifice quality when we eliminate synthetics. It's a feed the soil, not the plant approach. Athletic fields, to protect our children, we have our choices and challenges. I showed this slide to turf managers from National Football League, Major League Baseball, and I said, what was that if you had put 2,4-D down on that field, and that was your daughter in that lacrosse game, and her water bottle, and her face in the grass, what would your comfort level be when you had a mask, when you had gloves, when you had boots? And their jaws dropped because their training had never allowed them to make that correlation. It's doable, it's not cost prohibitive. A lot of strategies we have now, we understand the plant, we just don't open bags. Boulder, Colorado, worked with them in 2010, and Greenleaf Park, it's a municipal neighborhood park, cool season grasses, before picture, after picture, both during the active growing season. Program began in 2011, no pesticides or synthetic. Boulder's amazing. It's all their grounds now are organic. You can go down in the municipal complex downtown, you can't find a weed. There's no such thing as a weed on Boulder turf. We don't call clover a weed. Clover's a good guy. There's some clover. We intentionally seeded a public park with clover so that they would never have to buy a bag of fertilizer. This park was so bad, very compacted, bare spots, challenged, puddles, anaerobic. We heard about anaerobic compacted soils produce alcohols, 1 part per million alcohol, solubilizes roots. 25 parts per million alcohol is typically what's in compacted soils. This property was so bad, they were gonna rip it up and start again. It was only 6 years old. This is what it looked like. That's how compacted it was, as far down as we could get. That's all we could get, just thatch, minimal turf density, unhealthy system, weed pressures, and that's what we transitioned it into in 3 years. And as you go through here on a close-up, weeds were replaced with grass. It's a healthy system, and we exceeded expectations. First time I was there was not a soul on this property. When I was there 3 years later, there was a fellow playing a guitar, there were kids playing, picnicking on the grass. So we had done this, and it was a very basic program, nowhere near as sophisticated as we are now. Another project in Colorado, this is 15 months after heavy pesticide use, heavy synthetic fertilizer use, 5+ pounds of nitrogen, spring and fall, broadleaf herbicide sprays. When I met with them the first time, this is a case where the activists got the city council to institute this pilot program of 3 years. And then the city council voted it, mandated it on the park, and the park department was against it completely. In my first meeting with the park superintendent, she told me that nobody had ever died on their fields, that they had never made anybody sick, and this whole thing was a joke, and if there was one more weed after a year or two, then I was a failure, and they were gonna go back to their chemicals. And I said, nice to meet you too. And so this is what it looks like. This is almost a year and a half after pesticides and synthetics were stopped cold turkey. Look back, and this is a 7.2 acre athletic field complex. And I walked this with this park superintendent and her turf manager, facility manager, and we got right out to here, and he pointed down and said, there's a weed. There was one bindweed in the middle of 7.2 acres. So I reached over, pulled it out, put it in my pocket, and said, good IPM, no more weed. So moving through here, this is it in Massachusetts, one of my projects, softball, field hockey, phys ed, it's just grass, and we haven't used herbicides, and sports turf, and field hockey, where we chop that grass. Many of you have heard mowing heights, you keep it up around 3 inches for an organic lawn, this is about 1.75 inches. But we can make it work because we take other strategies to make that happen. So just a few pictures to show you that it works. It's not something to, it's not just pie in the sky organic at this point, totally science-based, and as long as we follow the right protocols, we get success. Thanks. Well, they wanted to, but I said, no, thanks, I don't want to work for you anymore. I talked to the new mayor, though, and let him know what his staff was like.
Okay then, our next presenter is Lani Malmberg, who has a goat grazing business named Goats Green, and she is our overeducated Beyond Pesticides board member along with me, so welcome again to Lani.
Thanks, Colehour. So you already know who I am. So we have to feed the system, and I think Chip and Mark and I say the same thing with a few different twists to the words, but it is the same idea. Oh, is that really fuzzy there on the? Okay. Anyway, feed the system. I'm not out there to kill anything. I'm going to use some of these things to recycle and make organic matter out of. But I'm not interested in killing anything. I don't need to. But we've got to feed the soil, and we've got to build diversity and stability. And that's how we do it, is by feeding it, bringing it together. I get calls like this all the time. This is Colorado Springs. I'm up on top of the side of the mountain, Garden of the Gods. And this is a mullein. It's a biannual plant. And these people are just fanatic about wanting to kill the mullein. They just hate them. They're just after them with a vengeance. So somebody sprayed, and they didn't do a good job, so it didn't kill it. And now we have all these mutated seeds. And then they come and ask me how much it'll cost for me to come in. And I tell them, and they said, oh man, we can't afford that. But they don't account for their failed treatment with pesticides that should be, the cost to me should be charged back to them because it didn't work. But they never think like that, So then I got to bring the goats in and eat all those mutated seeds, and goats destroy all seeds. There's nothing that comes through in their poop because of the shape of their mouth and how they chew and the enzymes and bacteria in the gut. So as you can see, this is the side of a mountain. There isn't any soil. We have to build soil. And I've had to recycle all of these mutated seeds and get rid of them and eat all the seeds off these stalks and then build soil with the organic matter and the hoof action with the goats. So we're doing 15 things at the same time, one pass through. And there they are. It's a biannual. All they have to do is eat these seeds off the stalk, and then I'm done. Soils test, take soils test everywhere I go, exactly like Chip. I have it tested exactly like Chip, so I know what to do. This is in Wyoming, and it's a 100-year-old road bed coming into this ranch, and they wanted to build a lodge and move the road, and this was going to be the lawn. So 100 years of driving vehicles on this road, and I said, well, I can do that. I can revegetate it with goats. So we got some seed, scattered it out. I could only find 7 bales of oat straw that I used for mulch. We'd graze these goats up on the side of the mountain, then bring them down here at night to get all the organic matter and get the seed trampled in and get all the organic matter, fertilizer, irrigation on that seed and build the soil. Building it in 2000, that was 2001, by the way, the worst drought of the century then. They've had 2 more worse droughts since then. But here come the weeds. And this is kochia, which is an annual weed, which is that first step in succession as you go from bare ground building something. So succession's moving forward. And remember, it was a horrible drought, so it took 2 years just to get to the first step. But the owner put a hot wire there and put horses in. I only went once a year as I was passing through Wyoming, and had my goats on it only once a year whenever I happened to be there. So here it is in '07, and now we're looking back up towards the cabin. And this is where I knew I almost had 1 million pounds per acre. My goal is to get the density of the animals at 1 million pounds per acre, and I had 1,600 goats here on 1/6 of an acre, which translated to like 980,000 pounds per acre. So I just about had it there. And this is what it looked like. And it took 7 years going once a year, but we had 2 horrible droughts, but we always kept going forward to the goal. It never did anything else. There was no irrigation here, and it was just the natural elements. So this was, that old road came right in through here and turned. And if you took the camera and looked straight down, that's what it looked like. Just like what Chip just showed you. And I did it all with goats. Again, the key to build the soil is poop, urine, and the hoof action. And again, side by side. I got a call in Denver. I was doing City of Denver open space, and this woman called me and said her mother died of cancer, and she just was diagnosed with cancer, and they used to be gardeners in their backyard in Denver, and it was so overgrown, and the city was after her for weed problem, and she wanted to know if I'd bring the goats and come and take care of her backyard. So usually I say no, but for her I said yes. That's my son. He's 6'2", and he's in the backyard. The only way to get into the yard was through this hole in the fence that had fallen down. So backed the horse trailer up, took a load of goats, backed up through the yard, back to that hole in the fence, and unloaded the goats, which you can hardly see them back there because this is Canada thistle, which is a listed noxious weed in Colorado, and put the goats in there, let them eat, and they recycled it all, put it all back in the soil, and she was absolutely delighted. So it's a contrast of the oil field work out on 1 million acres or middle of Wyoming on a roadbed or this woman's backyard. You know, it doesn't matter. I'll go anywhere, do anything. I just need to know what is the goal. And that's it for me. Thanks.
You're so close.
Okay. Yeah, no. I said go. Okay. All right then. Next up, we have Steve and Gregg, who we haven't heard from yet, but he's worked at Mother Earth Gardens as an ecological landscaper here in the Twin Cities area for the last number of years, and he also has Perennial Partners Nursery. I can add. Not only it does say for you that, his experience started in Chicago working in urban farming, but he also is a home-scale mycologist who eats his own mushrooms, which I totally resonate with and love to hear. So welcome to Stephen.
Thank you. Okay, I actually, my landscaping that I do is just like residential landscaping, and that's on my own, separate from working at the garden store. So for the last 4 years, I've been working at Mother Earth Gardens, which is a organic garden store, and having a lot of opportunity to interact with customers there, which has been really valuable to kind of connect my own values for kind of ecological landscaping and gardening with concerns of people coming in and trying to be able to relate that information. So, that one. Okay. So, just kind of wanted to define stuff. Talking about urban landscaping and gardening and things. These are similar problems that everybody on rural space or whatever. But there's a big lack of time. There's pests, there's weeds. People want, because of the lack of time, really low maintenance plants, and there's an increasing interest in pollinators. And then, people are really concerned with aesthetics in the city. And then they want solutions, and they often, a customer coming to me for landscaping things, they kind of are searching. This is Indiana Jones, searching for the Holy Grail. They're looking for some kind of magic solution that's going to be no work and that kind of thing. So, and just solve all the problems. But so then, it does have the animation. So when I work with people, I try to educate them and manage their expectations. I am a native-focused landscaper, and trying to convince them that organics is, I kind of leverage that people don't have a lot of time and energy. So if people are a little bit on the fence or they've been doing pesticide and herbicide, it's usually you can convince them that, ultimately this is going to be an easier thing. But again, there's like no such thing as, people want to have like a low maintenance small orchard, or they want to have, something like that. So trying to have it so that they know that things take time, that there is, can be a transition period and things. And it's supposed to say grass there, but in terms of grass, people come to me and they have questions about fixing their grass and things. I often, if you have grass that's there's no problem or anything, you can leave it. But in terms of, if there's a lawn that's problematic, it's a huge amount of land across the country. They use a huge amount of chemicals, like more than farms, and then just this water usage. And, trying to have people kind of determine what sort of space they actually want to use in their, like in an urban lawn or an urban yard. So it's nice to have like a space of grass for the kids or dogs to run in, but then, you have kind of shady patches in the back or something. Doing a woodland garden. I talked a little bit at the end about seeding clover into areas where the grass doesn't work. Doing something other than just having these big lawns with like little plantings of flowers. And then again, I do native focus, but I'm not totally strict about that. I like to use plants that are not fussy. So there's lots of examples of things that work really well, and I think that that's nice to mix native plants that work well and will be aesthetic and not run crazy in somebody's yard. There's also cultivars of native plants, which are more compact, so it can be nice in a urban lawn where you don't want 5 foot tall or 7 foot tall or taller even plants. And then even plugging in where somebody has an existing landscape and they have some problems, taking those fussy plants and putting in native plants that will be nice examples of, nice aesthetic things that will blend in with that. And then leaving existing things. I don't like to really tear out when people have a bunch of, plants that are maybe non-native, just trying to kind of tweak landscapes as well. And then, this is like the kind of natural prairie aesthetic that people think of, but then there's also like modern examples. This is the High Line in New York City and in Manhattan, and it's an old railroad line that was is no longer used. And so they've put a lot of native and low maintenance plants in there, but they also have incorporated other things. They've had species that were growing up there before that they've continued to use up there. So it's a really great example of, and they have these kind of strips, and if you put a different like architectural elements like benches or, different stonework and stuff, you can have a really modern looking landscape in still incorporating prairie plants, so it doesn't have to just be this kind of wild space that you can't go into. And then another thing that I can get people excited about is I think traditional landscaping is so focused on aesthetics and heavy management, and people are more and more interested in pollinators, but that's another thing, like to shift your goal from, if you have a flower garden or something and there's some of your plants are not doing as well, people feel like they've failed at having a garden or that it doesn't work or something. But the idea of putting in pollinator plants and then they're looking for those plants, it like kind of shifts their goals. And then it can get them very excited. You can see pollinators in one season if you start to have flowers throughout the season, things like that, and it gets people kind of excited. They feel like they're succeeding with their landscape. And then I just have these a couple of profiles of individual pollinators, and sometimes I'll tell people different things that I see in their landscape or something to look for, because it's like learning a language. They can go out in their yard and feel more connected. There's mason bees, which are really excellent pollinators. They can go out and start seeing those, and they don't sting. And then there's things that go out. The parasitic wasps are beneficial insect. Again, they don't sting. They go out and kill the aphids, and so you can see that happening. So for some customers, I go into more detail or less. But and then another really good technique. All this is just like planting things in the right place and using techniques that'll just doesn't stress out the plants, doesn't require a lot of maintenance to maintain it. But rain gardens is a really great example, and I'm sure there's been other talk of rain gardens at the conference, but it's essentially an impression that you plant water-loving species, things that can tolerate being kind of saturated with water at the bottom, and then up top there can be drier plants. And this is something you could put a lot of natives in here. You could put, it can be a native pollinator rain garden, and then it's getting runoff from the roof. So, again, it's another thing where when people see that after a storm that their rain garden is full, that the plants are growing, and then that rain infiltrates into the soil. They get excited because it's, these things work, and it just feels like they're having a successful garden again. And while it's doing that, it cleans the water, it prevents all this runoff from going into the streets and into the sewage systems and things. So, it's ecological, it's easier for the plants, it's easier to keep things watered, and once they're established, they really don't need all that much work. So, just a couple of things all about water. And then just kind of finally, some other strategies is, like I said, planting clover where the grass is failing or where grass is patchy and things. And a lot of people are amenable to that. You still get, you get like flowers in your grass as well. So that's, another good thing for pollinators. And having raised beds is a nice thing to, you can kind of plug those in and have gardens and things. You have less weed pressure until that would eventually build up in there. But it can be a nice aesthetic thing to put into different spaces without it looking wild. And then when people want like a new flower bed incorporated in, and they have grass or they have some area where it's really weedy, doing sheet mulching, which layering cardboard down, and then ideally you would put some compost or some kind of a planting mix that you could plant into, and then a mulch on top of that, and you can immediately plant over top of grass, or as long as some weeds are too pernicious for that kind of thing, but it's a nice way that you can really go in. You don't have to spray everything. You don't have to dig it all out or do a ton of work. So it's a really effective thing. And people are always like, they're like, well, if these weeds come back, I'm gonna be calling you. But often it works really well. So yeah, and that's it for organic urban management. So.
Okay, so, well, I may or may not be able to make this one happen, but that's fine. So our last speaker is going to be Russ Henry, and since 2005, he's operated Giving Tree Gardens, and also is in the development of another business called New Land, which deals with soil health consulting. Like it does say in your information, he's currently running for an at-large position in the Minneapolis Park Board of Commissioners. And I'll just add that he did serve, and I don't know exactly for how long, but it's pretty appropriate to share as co-chair of the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council for food growing public policies, which I think is something we all should support. So, like I said, if I have problems with setting this up, he's going to help me, but welcome. Yeah, that's as far as I can get it. Thanks, Colehour.
Hi, everybody. How you doing? End of a long conference. I'm really glad to be here. As I was introduced, I am Russ Henry. I own Giving Tree Gardens, which is a small organic landscaping company. I am working on a new business called New Land, which is beginning to consult with farmers on transitioning soils to a biological management approach. And then I'm running for park board, and I'm running in order to get the pesticides out of our parks. Thank you. Every time I say that in front of a room full of people, they clap. That's a good sign. And I got the chance to say that at 5 different conventions today, as we're having political conventions over the 3 weekends. This is the middle weekend here in Minneapolis. And so I can tell you that the city is pretty excited to go organic in our parks. I'm here today to talk about how we could possibly create a pesticide-free Minneapolis. Yeah, I'm dreaming big. So I'm just going to get started here, and I can tell you that we're partway down this path, and we've got a long way to go. So I'll walk you through those steps. Let's see. I guess I hit that one. Yes. So as you can see, long way to go down this path here. The first step was that we created a pollinator-friendly city resolution here in the city of Minneapolis. And anybody here know Erin Roop? Yep, everybody knows Erin because she's amazing, and she really helped get that going with the city. Her and me and a few other folks went around to every city department that uses pesticides, and we talked to them about alternatives. We gave them a list of alternatives and worked with them. And then, due to the political pressure at the city council, we were able to pass a pollinator-friendly city resolution that directed the departments to stop using pesticides. Now, 2 things. First of all, in Minneapolis, we have an independent park board, which is separate from our city. And so they're not governed by the city council. And so that's one department that wasn't affected by this at all. But then looking at things like public works departments and our fire departments and the convention center where they're using pesticides, a year or 2 after, in following up with those departments, we found that actually they're still using pesticides. They're driving up and down the street on the 4-wheeler, spraying things in the cracks and all over the place. I should also mention that our schools are also we have an independently elected school board. And so that's a 3rd municipality here within the city that is using pesticides and that did not have to listen to the city's pollinator-friendly city resolution. So that was step one. It was a great learning experience, and it really gained. On here it says there's no substantive changes in practices, but there was a substantive change in people's imagination, I think, throughout the city. And so this was very important to kind of build a little momentum around getting away from pesticides. So then the next step, public schools. So it's absolutely heartbreaking to me to know that we're using pesticides at our schools. And they're using Roundup, they're using 2,4-D, they're using different insecticides on the inside of the school as well. And in thinking about this, because I'm so motivated around these issues, I started having conversations with administration at the school board and found out kind of, what's going on with the pesticide use. And those conversations started when some friends and neighbors came to me and said, A, they had seen the fellow with the backpack spraying around their school, and B, they had received notices that the school would be using pesticides. And that's very frightening for parents. My son's 20 now, and so he's out of those schools, but when he was in there, I didn't know they were using pesticides, and it just kind of, it's heartbreaking, like I said. So I went to the schools and found out what was going on, and I did a little momentum building around this. We put together some kind of social media work around it, and we did some signature gathering and these kind of things. And so the schools were a little afraid of me when I got there because they knew I'd been speaking up about this. And so this is a very important piece of the puzzle. I met with the person who was most in charge of using pesticides at the schools, and I just let them talk to me. And I let them tell me everything they were afraid about, what they heard about me and getting the pesticides out, and then about all the pressures that they're facing from the parents, and how the teachers allowing pets and food in the classrooms is bringing all these insects in, and then the parents will give them all this grief, and the students have to play with the weeds in the fields, and the Star Tribune wrote a big report about it. And so I listened, and that was really after that there was this kind of breathing moment, and I said, I hear you, and I'm with you, and I want to make life easier. And at that point, the person that I was working with, very level-headed guy, he said, okay, well, let's think of what we could do together. So we started there to put together the idea of a pesticide-free schools transition committee, and worked with staff for a good 6 months designing this committee, and then went to the superintendent, and then I went to the political leadership. So at the city, when we did the pollinator-friendly city resolution, that started with the political leadership and did not result in substantive changes in practices. So I decided, let's start with the employees at the school board, and they have assembled now a team of all staff plus me, and we have a pesticide-free schools transition committee set up at the schools. So this is as far as I think we've gotten so far in moving towards a totally pesticide-free city here in Minneapolis. Now, baby steps, right? We're definitely not there yet, and we've given ourselves a 5-year timeline with this pesticide-free schools transition committee. When we brought it in front of the school board, it was basically to explain that the superintendent had decided to do this, and there wasn't a big political uproar. And instead, what we're doing is I'm trying to create political wins for the people who are currently in charge around eliminating pesticides. Because if instead of getting beat down by people coming to them being mad, if they get uplifted by people coming to them being exalted that they're getting rid of these pesticides, well, then that's how we can create some momentum and keep moving down the road. So what's next? Next is the park board. 6,500 acres of land here in Minneapolis. I am so excited about the potential of our park board to eliminate pesticides. So far in this election, I've made about 4,000 phone calls, been out door knocking. Today I got to give 5 speeches to the conventions, and next weekend it'll be 4, and last weekend it was 4, and we're just going to keep on bringing this message, and people are very excited about it. And it's kind of, you know, even though it's not the only thing I talk about in my platform, I certainly talk about all sorts of different issues in my park board platform. People come up and say, "Oh, you're Russ. You're the guy going to get rid of the pesticides." And so I appreciate that there is a groundswell of desire for having safe spaces where we know the kids can just roll around in the grass, and we can bring the dog, and the birds are going to swoop through, and everybody's going to be safe. And that's what folks are really looking for in their parks, is a place where we get health. And so, at this point, because I've been pushing so hard on this, because neighbors have been pushing so hard on this, and because I've made special outreach to every campaign that's running for park board, every single challenger in the park board race is now anti-pesticide. Yes. And there is a challenger in every single district. And so I'm really glad about that. This could be a game-changing year at the park board. So then, what's coming down? What's next after that? So if we're thinking about a totally pesticide-free city, which I'll just say that I'm an organic landscaper, but I am regularly doused in pesticides because I have to go from lawn to lawn, and all the neighbors, you know, they might be using some of that stuff too. And so, you know, the ChemLawn guy pulls up and sprays willy-nilly, and it's all, you know, I've been doused coming over trees and walking through yards and what have you. There is an inordinate amount of pesticide use going on in Minneapolis. It is frightening when you see it on a day-to-day basis. And just, you know, every time, I've talked with lots of little, you know, groups of school kids, and I always teach them about the signs, to watch out for the little pesticide signs, and then also to just look for dandelions and clover, because if you see dandelions and clover, you're pretty much going to be safe and you can go play in that yard. But let's talk about preemption for a second. The state of Minnesota, in all of their wisdom, has for many years now held a preemption against any city in the state of Minnesota making any rules at all regarding the sale, use, distribution, storage, management, disposal of pesticides. We can make 0 rules about pesticides in our city. That's the big one, because I'll tell you what, there's enough momentum of people in our city that the city council would easily cave under pressure to, I say easily, it would take the work, but they would cave under pressure to eliminate pesticides if they could. And the state knows that. And so for decades, they've preempted us from doing anything. They're about to preempt, maybe perhaps, our plastic bag ban. They're looking at preempting our $15 minimum wage and other workers' rights protections. And they're thinking about preempting our shredded tire ban. So apparently, the state of Minnesota knows a whole lot more about what it's like to live in Minneapolis than we do, or than the folks in Minneapolis do. Or they know more about what it's like to live in any of our cities than any of us do. And so that is obviously false and demeaning, demoralizing kind of stance that they're taking. And the city of Minneapolis does not like to be preempted. The city council and mayor like to think that they're in charge of things. And so on our legislative agenda right now is trying to eliminate this preemption in state law. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle. I hope that one day we're driving the clock back the other way in terms of preemptions, and that we can get rid of those plastic bags and protect the workers and get rid of the tires and get rid of the pesticides once and for all in our city. When I talk with farmers outstate, because I do soil health work with farmers, what I find is that time and again, they'll say, yeah, you know, my neighbors, or I used to use pesticides, but whew, you folks in the city, you really love your pesticides. And it's true. It is just an absolutely inordinate amount of use that's going on here. I wanted to point that this is a Republican and a Democrat issue. This goes both ways. There are people on both sides of the anti and pro-pesticide, on both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat. There's a way to connect with everyone about getting off pesticides. Oh, are you a sports hunter guy? Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about how the wildlife is affected and how you can't go fishing if there's no fish because the lakes are too polluted. Or or are you way over on the left-hand side, but you want to have the really nice, neat-looking place? Well, let's talk about people's health and safety. There's a way to connect with everybody about this. So that having been said, it is also, I think, imperative that at the same time that we're trying to push policies, that we develop market-based solutions. And so, I guess I shouldn't be putting in a plug for organic landscaping companies as an organic landscaper up here, but that's one way to push. Every single person who buys a plant from a nursery should check with that nursery about where the plant came from and if it has pesticides in it, and if the nurseries that they're buying from use pesticides. That's one way to start moving the dialogue on pesticides. Organic pest control services, we don't really have that. We don't, I haven't seen that, at least in Minneapolis yet. But we do have an amazing amount of organic food selection here in town, which I think is really driving the desire. The same folks who buy organic food, they want to have organic parks and organic spaces. So market-based solutions, I think, are going to be very important at the same time to offer a dual track of getting us towards a pesticide-free city. And then actually let's add a third layer into that track with homeowner education. And so this is the type of thing where everyone in here could walk up and down their block with a little piece of paper, says, will you sign on to we're going to try and make this a pesticide-free block? And, well, why should I do that? Oh, well, here's some nice information about how, we could help protect the pollinators and the kids. And, oh yeah, but I hate the weeds. Well, here's some great information connecting you to some organic landscaping companies, this kind of thing, so you could get some advice about that. In this way, we are all very empowered to just go door to door, just start having those conversations, because your feet can take you and your mouth can help move the thing along, and we can get one neighbor at a time is a huge victory, right? So we can I think, move this through the block captain or through just talking with friends. And then certainly talking with anyone who's running for office and asking them where they stand on the use of pesticides, I think is absolutely important. And then going a step further and asking if people running for office would be interested in creating public investment in pesticide-free spaces. So education needed for departments in order to fly in experts from around the world to bring us information we need in order to transition. Then we've got the need for national advocacy, still to get us towards that path of pesticide-free Minneapolis. And thank goodness for today and for the groups like Beyond Pesticides and Pesticide Action Network and Organic Consumers Association, and for everybody doing the work around all of these areas of keeping up with science, the laws and policies, and safety for everyone. And lastly, and I've said this kind of already, but every person is responsible, I believe, in this place. We are people. And just frankly, we are the planet's #1 problem. And how do we make ourselves a little less problematic? And one of the biggest problems that we as people perpetuate in our environment are pesticides. The problems, the butterfly effect, it goes so far beyond the action of that spray can. Our use of pesticides has global effects. And so I feel like we're all responsible. And the last thing on there, repeated 3 times, organize, is really, I believe, the key to long-term success. We can win short battles just by putting up a big fight, and then we find out that those things sometimes get knocked backwards. So the real key to sustaining long-term changes in the way that we manage land and in the way we could get rid of pesticides will require us to really get organized as people. And so, running for office is one idea for getting organized. Certainly not everybody can do that. but joining in any one of those national or local organizations, anything you can think of, and I'd be glad to help folks connect with ways to organize and to be organized with their neighbors. And then, at the end of that beautiful long road, we get this clean, safe city with hot air balloons. It's going to be amazing. Well, yeah. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks for your work to eliminate pesticides.
Thank you. We'll be seated up here. Yeah. 2 questions. So we have about half an hour, folks. If people have questions for these panel members, if they'll all come up and sit up here, then I think we can go forward. So do I have any questions? Okay. Bring in a microphone.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone. I enjoyed you all. My question is for Mark Davis. I share your sentiment as through the past years, I've been asked to, I'm a master naturalist, I've been asked by the DNR to pull buckthorn and mustard plant, and I've often wondered, this is a losing battle, why are we doing this? And yet at the same time, with buckthorn in particular, I know that as a diuretic, it's not good for birds, it doesn't have the nutrients, the species, variety of species or number of species goes down as buckthorn takes over, so the habitat changes. What do you say about that kind of plan to remove buckthorn, as futile as it may seem at times?
Well, first of all fruits are diuretics. That's the purpose of a fruit, is to go through the digestive system fast enough so the seed is not digested. So it's doing what fruits are supposed to do. One of the reasons robins are now around here all winter is because of plants like buckthorn, non-native honeysuckle, crab apples. They're all providing food for birds. So I would question the science, or in fact, to the extent there even is science, to support the claims that the berries are somehow bad for the birds. Birds have been around a long time. They know what's good to eat and what's not good to eat. And the buckthorn berries are produced by the buckthorn to be eaten by birds and dispersed. So it doesn't make sense that they would be producing something that would make birds sick and would prompt them to avoid them. So I think that claim is not well founded in science at all. With respect to diversity going down, that's not happening at the McAllister Field Station, where the buckthorn is not taking over. It's just scattered around as with the other shrubs. It's not uncommon for native plants to reduce biodiversity. It's not so much the plant in many cases, it's the growth form, it's the phenology of it when it blooms and when it doesn't. At the McAllister Field Station, for example, the plant that really keeps other plants from growing underneath it is interrupted fern. That's a native fern, but it grows densely and pretty broadly in some areas. And yeah, there's not much else that grows there. So it depends upon the site. Now, for example, if buckthorn were in my yard, yeah, I would take it out because my yard is 40 feet by 125 feet. And it's our yard, and we get to choose about what we want to grow and not. I think it can make sense for some parks of a modest size, particularly nature centers, to cultivate plants, a variety of plants, just for educational purposes. And in those cases, it might make sense to reduce buckthorn in certain areas. It will be a perpetual activity that, as you've probably found out, I mean, buckthorn's a Minnesota plant now, It's part of the Minnesota flora. It's a common member of the forest understory. So if you have a small area where you can physically remove them without using pesticides, you can do that. As I said, you're going to have to do it into perpetuity. But a lot of the claims are actually of not only buckthorn but of other non-native plants are not really based on good science, and some of it is just really nonsensical. So that's a few comments.
I have a question for both Chip and Russ, and I guess I'll start with Russ. My name is Shay. I own an organic lawn care company in town. So I just want to say that there is organic insecticide or things you can control insects with, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that later. And the one thing that was interesting when you talked about going door to door to neighbors is that it's very hard for me to try to sometimes work with a city because they can't promote me as a business, or they'll say, I cannot promote you as a business, but how do I get in and help educate? We flyer all over, do social media, participate in all of these organizations, but to say that there are options out there where people think, well, I want to support you, but I need to have weed control. Well, there is options. There is organic weed control. And then that goes over to Chip and what you think about corn gluten meal and what you think about chelated iron as not organic, but natural weed suppression tools.
Yeah, the city can be a tough nut to crack, and I appreciate that there are lots of ways to control insects without the use of pesticides. What I have yet to see is a company of the size that could handle what I'm specifically thinking of is the school district has an insect or a pest control company. And there really isn't a comparably scaled or sized company that could just step in and we could just switch vendors. So there's work to do on that. And as an organic landscaper, I absolutely appreciate that there are ways to control weeds and insects without using any pesticides. And I'm really grateful that you're doing that too. What's the name of your company?
Organic Lawns by Lawns.
Oh, awesome. Excellent.
So the two question was Fiesta, chelated iron, and corn gluten. I'm not a big fan of corn gluten because I don't think the efficacy is there. See, the corn gluten is the product swap out. And when we approach organic as a product for product swap with conventional, we fail every time. Corn gluten was developed by a professor at the University of, it's Iowa State, for saleable product as an alternative. The problems with it, you have to put it down at a rate of 2 pounds of nitrogen, 1,000 square feet, spring and fall for 3 successive years, which means there is some efficacy there, but you can't overseed. And ultimately, when you're trying to get rid of crabgrass or an annual weed grass, it's new grass seed, just like Lani's pictures of bare ground, and it was grass seed that did it. Chelated iron, Fiesta, it originally got that's EPA registered because the iron is natural, but it's chelated with HEDTA, which is the synthetic chelating agent. The original labeled registration was for 5 ounces a gallon, 1,000. Then that wasn't working. It went up to 7 ounces. I know people that use it at 16 ounces, and it's effective, but that's against the law. That's a violation of the label law. 2 new products that are just out this spring you might want to look at. One is called Halo. Halo is a selective post-emergence that is 25B exempt, OMRI certified, and it is it's actually not OMRI certified, it's 25B minimum risk exempted material. And the active ingredients are soy and eugenol. Its sister product is a pre-emergence called Preem. Preem is between 65 and 75% effective, more effective than corn gluten, and the advantage to Preem is you can grass seed, overseed the same day. So I've trialed both products for the manufacturer for the last 2 years. and had degrees of efficacy, but we know that it varies from location to location. There's a temperature dependency and situations like that. But for the cost of corn gluten versus efficacy versus the fact that you're overloading with nitrogen and then you can't overseed, it kind of makes it not really a desirable product.
I have a couple of short questions for Lani about goats, but first I'd like to second what Professor Davis said about the accusations that are made about non-native plants. I'm an activist in California trying to prevent the eradication of our non-native forest because it is essentially the only forest we have, and because a lot of pesticides are being used to accomplish that. And many, many claims are made about theoretical damage done by that urban forest, which are totally without empirical evidence to support those claims. And there's a ton of empirical evidence that proves otherwise, which is just not believed by the nativists who are motivated by an ideology for which there is no scientific basis. But back to Lani. I'd like to know what her policy is about the goats grazing in places where herbicides have been used, how long you have to wait, that kind of thing. And I'd like to know how long it took for your goats to remove the weeds from that small yard that you did.
They didn't remove the weeds, they just recycled them to a different form and laid them down. It took about 4 hours for them to do that. And my policy, people who hire me typically don't want to spray, is why they hire me. And usually, it used to be that we were the last choice. You know, they'd go through everything and nothing worked, and then they'd call me. And now it's getting better because they call because they don't want to spray or can't use machinery or don't choose to use anything else. So usually I don't have that problem. But typically, by the time we get there, the chemical has already gone to the groundwater or somewhere else. You know, I learned a little tidbit in grad school that when you spray any herbicide and you've calibrated your equipment and the wind speed is 0 and the humidity is exactly right and somebody does it perfect, the best that gets to the target is 2%. So if any of those things are off, then it's, you know, less than 2% hits the target, 98% plus goes somewhere else. The water, the wind, the soil, or people, pets.
So as far as buckthorn goes, you know, we can drive, and I have a special deep affinity for oak trees, as apparently so do 500 other species. Oak trees lived here in almost geological time, and as I drive in my neighborhood or throughout the city and I see that buckthorn label, I know what it's doing to our native oak trees. And I agree with, I also agree that the good can be the enemy of the great. Our whole landscaping has been changed as a result of the Columbia Exchange. We want to reduce pesticide use. But I do feel and think that buckthorn is something, while we may not be able to eradicate it, but it does take some honoring of our oak trees and our indigenous species and some respect for the many life forms that are dependent on the oak trees. And if we don't pick up our garbage when it comes to buckthorn, we are really other species are going to pay a high price if we don't correct that. In Dakota County, hopefully in Lebanon Hills, which is a 1,000-acre area, they are going to maybe bring in goats. They're talking about that. They have goats in Meadsville. I understand goats are even being used by the city of St. Paul to try to correct this. I don't believe in the defeatist attitude like, oh, buckthorns, you know, we just got to give up on it. And I know for a fact, because I see it and I know it, that buckthorn threaten oak trees. And oak trees are critical for our ecosystem. So when it comes to buckthorn, it's not something that we can just say, oh, well, I guess we screwed up everything and we can't do anything.
Well, when you've done eradication for buckthorn, is there any data to suggest at the regional level you've had an increase in species diversity or a decrease in buckthorn abundance? I mean, I can see for woodlots, if you want oak seedlings to grow, goats are going to eat oak seedlings as well. And if you don't do another management practice, you can just get buckthorn the next year. But I'm wondering, is there any scientific data that supports local eradication programs have any effect on regional? In bugs, we have screwworm and Mediterranean fruit fly for commodities. But for landscape quarantine and eradication, there's no data that these programs ever get rid of the pest. They just slow its spread into certain local areas.
Yeah, no, that's true. At a very local level, there can be native plants, non-native plants like buckthorn in very small areas might be disadvantaged for oak tree regeneration. But for oak trees, it's not just buckthorn, it's any kind of a shrub is going to be bad for regeneration. The oaks need regular fire. The oaks are actually naturally declining in the area, whether buckthorn were here or not. Now, the oaks aren't going to disappear. They wouldn't disappear if buckthorn weren't here. They're not going to disappear if buckthorn were here or is here, which of course it is. And so what we're really talking about then are, how big of a problem or how much should we ring alarm if their relative abundances of species are changing. I mean, that's the most that we're talking about. Unless it's your yard, in which case you might feel that the presence of some species is going to be disadvantageous to another species, which is certainly true, or to a small park area. But at a regional level, yeah, I mean, the oaks are going to be here for the foreseeable future. The buckthorn's going to be here for the foreseeable future. It's really just a matter of how much resources do you want to allocate toward trying to garden nature in certain small areas. If it's your own land, well, you can do what you want. My concern is always, once you get involved with public money, is that really the best use of public money for, say, conservation or management issues to try to eradicate some of these species? But yeah, we shouldn't be ringing the high alarm of what's going to happen. With respect to buckthorn in particular, I don't know if any of you have been to Old Cedar Bridge, a wonderful nature site and birding site in Bloomington. I would take my students down there to go birding in the wintertime, and it was a great place to see robins because, the buckthorn was all over the place. And other birds too, the tree sparrows, a lot of overwintering birds were using the buckthorn to be in the wintertime. They have completely obliterated the buckthorn. They've removed it all from around the parking area and around some of the other areas. And it's a bird desert now. There's just nothing there. Now, the plan may be to plant some native species, and the birds don't really care. They're interested in structure, they're interested in food, but in some cases, it's the non-native species, and in this case, it was the buckthorn which was providing the structure and food for the winter bird species, and so you eradicate that, and they were very effective, very comprehensive. They really took it all away, and it's not a good place to see birds in the wintertime right now.
I'd like to respond to that too. I just really like to talk about the buckthorn issue, and as a candidate, I'm really stepping in it when I talk about the buckthorn issue. So bear with me. I really appreciate what Mark says, and I too, as a landscaper all my life, I have done a lot of observations of natural areas, and I too have found that where buckthorn are, the bird numbers are much higher than where buckthorn is not. That having been said, we have 6,500 acres of parkland. Some of that we can manage at a fairly reasonable cost, but we look at places like the River Gorge, and let me just say that when we have a mindset of battling buckthorn, the number one tool that gets brought out to battle buckthorn are herbicides, Garlon and Roundup. And if we really want to eliminate pesticides from our city, we've got to start thinking about these non-native species in different ways. There was recently a study from the university, I think it was maybe from the U of M, that said that creeping Charlie is very, very bad for bees. Just wait here. Because the nutrient density from flower to flower is not the exact same. Well, welcome to Earth. So, some of the science that's being produced around this stuff, you've got to kind of go back to where it's been funded from. And, I didn't follow the funding path on that one, but I imagine it would have, led back to Cargill or Monsanto or somebody like that. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of buckthorn, that yes, it's a problem in a lot of people's minds. And, what you're saying is a commonly held perception. What I'd like to see is the park board engage in doing science to find out if these commonly held perceptions are actually true.
Question for Chip, and that is, you showed us pictures of grass that you fixed. How did you do that?
How did
Those
we do
fields.
that?
Right, how?
Different projects. So in other words, what you saw was a lot of different types of landscapes and environments. And it basically, again, like Lani and I do the same thing. She looks at a site and determines what that site needs. I do the same thing. So I wasn't necessarily doing the same thing on the college campus as I was doing on those pictures from Southern California. So it becomes very site-specific, not site-specific to the point that we can't begin to standardize this. Soil testing is the first part of that. So when I get called into a project, I either get called into a very challenging area or I get called into one that is in pretty decent shape. When a municipality decides they want to do a pilot project, they usually give the worst property in town to me because, heaven forbid, organic management ruins some good grass somewhere. And so my answer is, give me the good one, and if I fail in 2 years, I'll go buy the Trimec or the 2,4-D and give it to you, and you can put it back the way it was before I started. So we look at the soil. Biological is where I start. So I look at what I have for biological life in the soil, and the whole beginning year of my program is focused on the soil. Not that it's not all the way through, but I address things at two different levels. I address what you can see up here, which is meeting the immediate needs of the plant, in this case turf grass, and I address what we don't see down there, which is the soil, and particularly the soil life. And I know that if in the beginning of a program I address both with equal focus, as I move 2 or 3 years into transition, the soil is going to pick up more of the needs of that grass plant or any plant, and then I back off on my product inputs. So the most important thing, once I get that biological soil test, I determine if I need NPK from organic fertilizer. Because if the biomass isn't there, and the biomass is only producing 50 or 75 pounds of nitrogen on its own, I've got to ramp that up until I can produce 175 pounds without fertilizer. So I want fertilizer in the beginning, but the day I put the first fertilizer down, I'm also putting down humic acids or kelps or plant-based soil stimulants or Brasinio steroids, brewer's yeast, micronutrients, humic acids, molasses, all of those kind of things at very low dose can go down now either liquid or granular, and they are building the soil at the same time as we're meeting the needs of the grass. And then in addition to that, we bring in the cultural practices, overseeding to fill in bare spots, because if I don't fill in a bare spot, nature's going to put a weed there. the proper mowing height for the right grass, relief of compaction. I don't want those alcohols being produced in compacted soil and dissolving my turf grass roots. And then that it becomes the systems approach of the marriage between soil biological life, product, and then culture.
Very simple.
So it's easy.
Hi, I'm way up here in the corner, sorry. I just wondered if you could comment on a controversy in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis and suburbs about crumb rubber artificial turf as a substitute for natural grass.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I was very involved in that subject. People made DVDs of me that went all over talking about what's not good about it. And Frank, I sort of got out of it because it clouded my primary focus on pesticide reduction. Because people were asking, because I always would say that if I grow an organic soccer field, it's a stronger field than a chemically managed field because I got a deep root system and all of that. And then they tried to get me to say that my organic grass was as strong as plastic. So I got out of that. But the bottom, quick, short answer, there's nothing good about covering 2 acres in plastic. It's all driven by this 24/7 play. Heaven forbid that our kids have a rain out and they can't play. We can plow the thing off in the wintertime. The crumb rubber is an issue. Those fields get to be 40 to 60 degrees higher temperature than ambient air temperature. So on a day when it's 75 or 80 degrees outside, it's not uncommon for those to be 150 to 160 degrees right down there. The crumb rubber is an issue. 1 teaspoon of crumb rubber leaves that field every time a kid plays on it. Ears, hair, socks. There's issues with that. There are alternative infills that are incredibly expensive, coir and cork. People don't tend to use them. Then the other big thing with it is the industry will deny it because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But resistant microbial infection and staph grows in that down in there in the warmth and the water and the moisture. It doesn't need, and then the organic debris in the air that settles in there, that allows that to grow. So we're growing those kinds of infections. So yeah, in my opinion, it is not a safe playing environment. Athletes don't like it. Professional National Football League football players, 72% of professional football players think that the synthetic fields shorten their career and lead to more injuries.
Okay, so we're probably only going to have one more question after this one, but here's the next one.
This is for Lani. I'm just curious, could you comment on the demand for goat grazing services? Have you seen an increase? Are you able to respond to everyone who calls you? Or how has your time in the business evolved?
Well, because I'm a gypsy, I can go to where the work is, as you saw the map, the red dots on the map. And we're going to be running about 2,000 this summer and maybe up to 3,000. The demand is huge, and it's at all levels of numbers, of sizes of need. I've got to have 1,000 head on top of a mountain for a rancher in western Colorado in June to run in front of the cows who are getting killed by larkspur poisoning. So I have to have 1,000 head there from June 10th till October 15th. And then we do a lot of city open space in the Front Range of Colorado and Wyoming. And I have to have very, very well-behaved, my best-behaved herds to move through those really tight spaces. Fireworks is legal in Wyoming, so we get, you got to have your best-behaved animals there. And that's bunches of 500 or 200. We could do these little backyard things I showed you all day long. People want that all the time, and it's so time-consuming, but it's really good money if you have people to go. The demand just gets higher and higher all the time. I have no one to hire because nobody has the skills. Because I'm an old ranch kid, and I rope, and I've been outside and know how to work in all the weather and stay safe and handle these animals in any situation you can give me. And these aren't skills that have come along, which I think that our population has been disconnected from the land 2 generations now, going on 3. So I've developed a curriculum, I've written a curriculum, and I want to teach professional herders, because when you have a job, any of those that I showed, you better have a professional herder on site so nothing goes wrong. Did I answer everything you asked, or did I get myself distracted? Okay.
I wanted to say thanks for all your work. This has been a fantastic panel as part of a fantastic event. So thank you. And Russ, you've been a champion for educating Minneapolis residents about just how much, how many herbicides are being used on the 6,500 acres of parkland. Drew Colehour with Beyond Pesticides was invaluable in helping us access Minneapolis records, 10 years worth of applications in which we found hundreds of glyphosate, generic glyphosate, 2,4-D being applied in wetlands, in the bird sanctuary, to remove buckthorn in Loring Park and Pond. So my question is, you know, once you're elected on the park board, we get some new blood and we start, you know, really addressing how do we transition to natural and organic? How do we bring in Chip to work with the park board, you know, in making this transition that that Minneapolis residents so desire? How do we move forward? I mean, how do we work with landscapers and promoting, you know, clean and promoting getting rid of pesticide use in our parks? How do we work with Mother Earth Gardens, you know, maybe students at McAllister College? And so I just throw that out to whoever is interested in answering. It's like, how do we really put action to Russ's organize, 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 amen, brother?
Well, I'll start with that. Thanks a lot, Pat. I appreciate your support. And I know one of my first moves, if I am lucky enough and get elected, then one of my first moves will be to, even before I take office, to try to meet with all of the department managers within the park board, because I'm sure that I know that they're hesitant about me and about the pesticides. So that will be one of my first moves, and really it's finding those decision points and working on them without, you know, with the right kind of pressure. So without being mean, being persistent, and being there for people when they have needs. You know, so I'm talking, you know, if I'm talking with a golf manager, well, he has a need, or he or she has a need to run a golf course that's weed-free and that's gonna make money. And so I have to understand that need and be willing to go there and help figure out how to fulfill those needs. One of the other things I'm gonna do right away is try to get Chip and Lani and other folks to come on down and try to get them hired as consultants through the park board so that we can bring in expertise, folks who have done this. So what do you think? You want to come consult with the park board here in Minneapolis?
Absolutely. I had one thing to say to those of you talking about the, what brush is it? Buckthorn. I don't know that plant, but I want to remind you to stay focused on the goal. What is the goal of this system? We want a healthy watershed. We want all our microbes to be alive and functioning and recycling our nutrients, and we want clean water that's available. We want our water held in our system, and keep focused on the goal and not off on one plant that'll drag you into where you don't want to go.
In response to what to do next, I think there's a real reason to be optimistic. Just for my interaction with students at McAllister, there has been a dramatic increase in the awareness of the problems facing the bees and everything that's needed to reverse that. And I know in the metro area, there are at least one, maybe two, or we've tried it at McAllister, at our field station actually, of using goats instead of pesticides. That's beginning to happen in the metro area. So I think the public and people who are in a position of power to make these decisions, I think there is a shift going on, toward using less pesticides, maybe moving away from them entirely. So I think I think we are in a time of change due to the work of everybody that we've been hearing from at the conference, and it's not a reason to stop the activity, but I think it's reason to assure ourselves that our activity has been having an effect.
So just, for you, Russ, that I think your message is being heard and you will prevail. My own experience, I'm the elected chairman of my park commission in my town, and Marblehead, Massachusetts was the first city in the United States in 2001 to ban pesticides on all and synthetic fertilizers on all public land, but mandating an organic approach in that regulation. And the one town, Cleveland Heights, Ohio, banned pesticides a year before we did, but did nothing. And then they had a horrible problem. So I worked with a colleague, and we actually wrote that regulation and had it adopted. And then I ran for the park board because it was going to take that to, had I not done that, it probably would have fallen by the wayside. So that's the goal, is to get on there and to stay on top of it. And now we're looking 16 years out of no pesticides on any public land in Marblehead, and it hasn't fallen apart. Many of those athletic fields you saw are ones that are mine, that I work on. I do it as a volunteer in my town, but the idea that, once you embrace this whole concept and begin to move forward, we actually dropped $7,000 or $9,000 out of the fertilizer budget because these fields were pulling in 175 pounds of nitrogen an acre on their own. So we don't have to fertilize as much as we used to, and they get better every year. So that's the message to take, that you get on there, you stick to it, and you will be successful.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and it's time for us to break for dinner. So, aloha.
Oh, right down the road a piece.